Imagine, a cold autumn morning. Archaeologists stand in the middle of an old monastery courtyard. The earth smells of dampness, moss, and metal. Under a layer of soil lies a stone that has not been touched for 7 centuries. It looks like an ordinary slab, but when it is lifted, the earth literally sighs. Underneath it is a body. And another, smaller one. A woman. And a baby. How did they end up here, under the sacred stone? At first, everyone is silent. No one expected to find anything like this under the monastery, a place where only priests or benefactors were supposed to lie. But here is another burial. No cross. No name. No prayer. Archaeologists note. A woman, 25 to 35 years old. Signs of childbirth. A full-term baby. And here, amid the dust and stone, a story begins. That tells of one of the darkest sides of medieval faith. We are used to thinking of a monastery as a refuge. Silence, prayers, candles, the smell of incense. But the truth was often hidden right under our feet. Under each slab lay not only holiness, but also what holiness tried to hide. Human bodies, human stories, human pain. When archaeologists cleared the ground, they found a fragment of a medallion next to the bones. On it, the face of the Virgin Mary is barely visible. It was placed on her chest after her death. As a sign of purification. As if to say that the woman died in grace. But if she was a saint, why was she buried without a name? And why was there a child next to her? In a nearby archive, they found an old book of visitations, reports of church inspections. The pages were yellowed and half erased. But on one of them, a name was visible, Agnes. No details. Just a short phrase. Behavior arouses suspicion. One word that has survived the centuries. And that is where her story begins. Who was she? How did she get here? And why was the body of a young woman with a baby lying under a monastery stone, a place where no mother should have been? This is not just an archaeological mystery. This is a story about how a system that preached holiness learned to hide what makes us human. And perhaps now, after 7 centuries of silence, Agnes will finally have a voice. To understand who Agnes was, we must go back to the time when she was still alive. When she was not yet called sister. And she still had hair, a name, and a dream, however small. France, 13th century. A village between hills, a field, smoke from stoves. Her father stands at the monastery gate and speaks briefly, almost as if at a market. A pig, 3 sacks of grain, and a girl they will never see at home again. This was the deal with God. Back then, it was called consecration. In reality, it was a way for a poor family to survive. One child was left behind, the other was given to the Lord. But the Lord had a different address, a monastery where discipline was stricter than any law. Her name was Agnes. She was maybe 8 years old. When she crossed the threshold of the monastery, she was met with silence. Not the silence of peace, but an oppressive silence. They shaved her head. They took off her clothes and gave her a coarse habit. And most importantly, they took away her name. From that moment on, she no longer existed. From now on, she was no longer Agnes. She was Sister Agnes. And sometimes not even sister. Just soul. The initiation ritual was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It was called burial alive. The girl was placed in a wooden coffin, covered with a dark cloth. And the priest read psalms that are usually recited over the dead. Then the coffin was placed in a cell, as a symbol that the old her had died. And the new her belonged to God. Sometimes the children fainted from fear. Sometimes they didn't wake up at all. Then it was called Holy Ascension. But that's not the worst part. Those who survived lived according to a schedule that erased everything human. Prayers until dawn. 5 hours of copying psalms. Silence during meals. Silence during sleep. Silence even when she just wanted to cry. She learned to hide her pain so that even God couldn't see it. All she had was her body. But it wasn't her body. It now belonged to the monastery. She was told, "Your body is a temptation. Your thoughts are sinful. Your touch is a trap of the devil." And the little girl learned to live in such a way that even breathing required permission. The medieval church called such girls oblates, gifts to God. But in reality, they were children who had been sold for the salvation of adults. And when we see her name in the archives today, one short Agnes, we must remember, she was not just a nun. She was a child who was buried alive. 10 years passed. Agnes grew up. Now her body was adult, but the world around her remained the same. Stone, cold, psalms, silence. There was no privacy in the monastery. Even your thoughts did not belong to you. You had to report everything, your dreams, your feelings. Because every feeling could become a temptation. One day, the abbess summoned Agnes to the hall. There stood a man dressed in black. A doctor sent from a monastery for men. He was to check the chastity of the sisters. That's what it was called, body visitation. Officially, protection of the monastery's honor. In reality, control, humiliation, and fear. The doctor spoke calmly, like an official. He asked about health, dreams, and trials of the flesh. And then he ordered her to lie down on the table. The abbess stood nearby and remained silent. For Agnes, it was not a confession. It was a rite of submission. The moment when her body finally ceased to be her own. Such checks were commonplace. The church believed that female purity had material value. It was the capital of the monastery. Every immaculate nun meant reputation, donations, and support from the nobility. Every scandal meant financial risk. Therefore, the female body became an accounting line item. Its condition was not a matter of faith, but of profit. Everything is clearly spelled out in medieval texts. Visitatio corporis, body inspection. Penitential, a manual for confessors. It contains hundreds of questions. Did you feel pleasure? Did you touch yourself? Did you think about your husband during prayer? Confession became not a purification, but a form of surveillance. The church learned to measure sin not by thoughts, but by the body. Agnes learned to remain silent. Because any word could become evidence of guilt. In this system, even silence had a price. They told her, the body is sin. And she believed it. Until one day her body said otherwise. It happened imperceptibly. She began to feel tired, strangely weak, dizzy. Her stomach felt full. Later, an entry appeared in the monastery books. Sister Agnes shows signs of physical disorder. At that time, no one called it pregnancy. She simply needed spiritual healing. Can you guess how it ended? It was the beginning of the end. Because in medieval Europe, a nun could not have a body capable of giving birth. If the body violated this law, it had to be corrected. Or destroyed. When the monastery began to notice that Agnes was ill, it was already too late. Her belly was growing. And prayers were not helping. But no one dared to say the word. Pregnancy. In a world where a nun was supposed to be incorporeal, pregnancy was not just a disgrace. It was a disaster. A council was convened, the abbess, the doctor, the confessor, and a messenger from the male order. Their task was to resolve the spiritual crisis. That's how it sounded in the official reports. In reality, it was a meeting to discuss how to hide the inexplicable. After all, if a child appeared in a convent, it meant that someone had crossed the line. Someone, perhaps, from among the brothers behind the wall. But no one spoke about it openly. After several weeks of silence, a new entry appeared in the books. Sister Agnes underwent purification through the mercy of God. The fruit was taken to heaven. Not a word about childbirth. Not a word about death. Only, the miracle of purification. This is how saints were born. When the system did something that could not be explained, it invented a miracle. And sin turned into legend. The monastery, which should have burned with shame, now received pilgrims. People came to see the saint who gave birth without sin. Her hair was kept as a relic. Her robe was cut into pieces. To touch the grace. Agnes no longer existed. Instead, an image appeared, the pure martyr. Her body was taken away, her story was rewritten. And her death was made profitable. Because every legend is an opportunity for the system to survive. Even if it means killing the truth. Today, historians find dozens of similar records. In Italy, France, the Czech Republic. Everywhere where nuns gave birth, the church announced the miraculous disappearance of the fetus. The child was raised to heaven. The mother was purified. And the monastery was saved. Everything was convenient, beautiful, pious. Only the earth did not forget. A century later, archaeologists will lift the stone again. And find her. The woman who was called a saint. And the baby who was taken by God. They will lie side by side. In the ground. Like two witnesses of silence. The church knew how to turn shame into a miracle. And every record of miraculous purification is, in fact, a document of a crime. But a crime that was long considered holy. 7 centuries later. The same monastery. The same stone walls. Only without prayer. Just the wind blowing through the corridors. Archaeologists are again removing layer after layer. As if dusting off forgotten history. When they open the slab, the earth sighs again. Underneath it, bones. A woman. And a child. Her hands are folded on her chest. A small skull lies near her shoulder. Between them, a fragment of a medallion with the Virgin Mary. It was placed there after her death. To purify her. The scientists work in silence. Only the camera clicks. But even amid the facts and protocols, something human can be felt. The silence is heavier than stone. One of the researchers will later say, "We often talk about holiness. But under this stone is just a woman. Who was forced to remain silent." Nearby, in the museum, there is now a display case. In it are the bodies of Agnes and her child. And next to it is a yellowed book of visitations. On the page are 3 lines. Sister Agnes. Miracle confirmed. Body buried with honor. 3 sentences that replaced a life. Sometimes, looking at these bones, people ask, how could this have happened? And you? Have you ever thought about how many stories we simply don't want to hear? But perhaps the question is not how. It is why we so easily forget. That behind every legend there is a body. And that holiness is not always light. Sometimes it's just an excuse. The church was silent. But the earth was not. It remembers. It remembers every child who was called an angel. Every woman who was made a saint. To hide her pain. And every time we lift a stone, it whispers, I am here. I have not disappeared. The story of Agnes is not just the story of one nun. It is the story of a system that built faith on fear, and then hid it under slabs inscribed with grace. But even a stone cannot remain silent forever. Holiness does not always mean kindness. And the truth does not always speak loudly. Sometimes it comes in whispers. From under the ground, from the dust, from the silence. You just need to bend down. And listen. If Agnes' story has touched you, please subscribe. Because under every old slab, there is a story that has not yet been heard. And perhaps you will be the one to uncover it.